to a Fish Out of Water podcast. This is your host, Richard Lipman. Today, we are interviewing Shahram Mokri. This is part 1 of 2 of this podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Demode Records, available at www.richardlipman.co/Demode Records.
My name is Shahram Mokri and I'm doing this interview for Fish Out of the Water podcast.
Tell us what you do and what inspires you.
من فیلم میسازم و فکر میکنم که خیلی کار پرهیجانی دارم انجام میدم. فیلم ساختن برام خیلی کار پرهیجانیه و عاشق این کارم.
I make films and I find this job, this art, extremely exciting.
Why is that? What's exciting?
همین قدر میخواستم دیگه، درسته؟ این یه رویایی بوده که من از دوره کودکیم داشتم. یعنی یه پدر خیلی علاقه‌مند به سینما داشتم که آلبوم‌های عکس هنرپیشه‌ها رو جمع می‌کرد از سراسر دنیا و موقعی که ما می‌خواستیم بخوابیم من و برادرم برای ما داستانایی در مورد فیلم‌ها تعریف می‌کرد و این ایده از بچگی در ذهن من اومد که تنها چیزی که میتونستم بهش فکر بکنم این بود. شاید مهمترین دلیلش برام این باشه، یعنی یکم یه ایده‌ای که از کودکی داشتم، نمیدونم اگه این نبود الان چیکار می‌خواستم بکنم.
I think it has to do with my childhood, the fact that my father was very much into cinema. He had all these albums where he collected photographs of actors and actresses from all over the world. And at night he'd tell my brother and me stories about films. And so it's always been a childhood dream. I think that's why I work in cinema today. And if I didn't have cinema, I really don't know what I'd do.
And I understand that he was educated and studied film with, and he was taught by a well-known Iranian filmmaker, Abbas. Can you tell us a bit more about that experience? And is there a story that influenced him?
A story,
about his education with these well-known filmmakers? Is there something, one particular thing, that he remembers that he uses now with Abbas?
من توی تهران سینما خوندم و مدل درس خوندنم اینطوری بوده که تکنیک خیلی اهمیت داشت توی دانشگاهمون، که دوربین چیکار میکنه، لنز چیکار میکنه و در مورد سینمای کلاسیک اونجا درس میخوندیم. بعدها با عباس کیارستمی آشنا شدم که کیارستمی اصلا در این موارد حرف نمیزد و بیشتر به ما میگفت که چطوری باید به محیط اطراف نگاه بکنیم.
I studied cinema, filmmaking at university in Tehran, and there at the time the focus was very much on the technique of cinema, cameras, lenses, but also classical cinema, the history of the great classics of cinema. After I met with Abbas Kiarostami, and it was very interesting. For him, technique really was not something to focus on or to talk about, but rather he taught us how to look at our surroundings, at the world around us.
And what was it he said?
اون چیزی که عباس کیارستمی به ما یاد میداد این بود که چطور به محیطمون نگاه کنیم. مثلا در کلاس‌هاش ایده هایی داشت در مورد اینکه راجع به باد فکر کنید یا راجع به یه در فکر کنید و قصه هایی رو درباره اونا تعریف کنید، ویدیوهای کوتاهی بسازین در مورد چیزایی که به نظر خیلی عادی و معمولی به نظر میرسن.
Well, he was really focusing on how to look at our surroundings, and in the workshops, in the classes, he'd give us short assignments to make videos or short films about, for instance, the wind or a door in front of us, and about all of these aspects of life which we tend to think are totally normal and neutral.
به نظرم میومد که کیارستمی نمیخواست فیلمسازای شبیه به خودش درست بکنه، بلکه میخواست هر فیلمسازی پیدا کنه که چطور میتونه خودش باشه، نه کسی شبیه به اون، شبیه به عباس.
And I think he really wasn't trying to form filmmakers who'd be similar to him, but rather he was trying to form a generation of filmmakers who would find themselves and find their very own cinema.
یه شب من توی خونه بودم، دومین فیلمی که ساخته بودم اسمش هست ماهی و گربه، و آقای کیارستمی به من تلفن زدن و توی تلفن به من گفتن که من بعد از اینی که یه فیلم خوب میبینم بیرون که میام یه سیگار میکشم. بعد از فیلم تو 2 تا سیگار کشیدم. من خیلی با خودم فکر کردم که آیا کیارستمی منظورش این بود که پس فیلم تو خوب نیست، یا اینی که فیلم تو 2 برابر خوبه. کیارستمی همیشه اینطوری حرف میزد، طوری که تو نتونی به چنگش بیاری.
And I remember sitting at home one evening, shortly after having made my second feature-length film, Cat and Fish. I'm so sorry, Fish and Cat. And I received a phone call from Abbas Kiarostami, and he told me, you know, when I watch a good film, I always smoke a cigarette after. And I've just watched your film, and I smoked 2 cigarettes. And you know, the fact is, I often wondered, what did it mean? Did it mean that it was not a good film for him, and so he had to smoke 2 cigarettes? Or was it so good as to be like 2 good films in one? And I think that says a lot about Abbas's way of being and the way he spoke. He spoke in a way that was never, that you could never really catch. It was always ambiguous. It was always multi-layered. You were never sure what exactly he meant.
How do you choose your stories and how do you choose your visual language?
من از دوره دانشگاه تصمیم گرفتم که روی ایده فیلم‌های لانگ تیک کار بکنم. اون موقع دوربینای دیجیتال در حال عوض شدن با دوربینای نگاتیو بود و من فکر می‌کردم چطور میشه قابلیت‌های دوربین دیجیتال رو به گرامر سینما اضافه کرد. اینطوری بود که فکر کردم که باید این فقط یه تغییر ابزار نباشه، بلکه تغییر زبان باشه و اینطوری شد که رفتم سراغ کار کردن با لانگ تیک‌های طولانی.
Ever since studying filmmaking at university, I became very interested in long takes, also because at the time we were going through the transformation of cameras from analog cameras to digital cameras. So I was very interested in what this new medium could add to the grammar of cinema, to the language of cinema. But I also thought it should not only be a technical addition, but rather really a new way of making films, and that's what I've investigated throughout my career.
Does he focus on a very strict placement of cameras and story and actors in the script, or does he improvise a bit?
در واقع یه نکته دیگه و اون رابطه زمان و لانگ تیک بود، چون که تو وقتی یه فیلم پازلی میسازی به خاطر اینکه پلان‌های مختلفی داری میتونی اینا رو هر جوری که میخوای بچینی و بعد مغز اون رو مثل یه خط زمانی صاف ببینه. من فکر کردم آیا میشه یک فیلم لانگ تیک ساخت و توی اون به مسئله زمان و داستانی که جلو عقب شه اشاره کرد بدون اینکه تو با کات زدن بخوای این پازل رو بسازی؟
I'd also like to add that another thing I'm interested in is the relationship between the passage of time and the long take. Because usually when you work in parallel narratives, you then you do a montage where they're one next to the other, and so the mind of the audience creates a linear timeline, a chronological timeline when looking at them. And instead, what I think is very interesting when you work with a long take is how can you play around with time? How can you play around with what came before, what came after, break somehow the notion of time, but do so all within the language of the long take?
I think that's also something that a British filmmaker also does quite a lot. Recently made a film about the nuclear scientist Jonathan. I forgot his name.
What's the film?
Oppenheimer.
Christopher Nolan movie, Tenet, for example. نولان توی فیلم اینسپشن وقتی که میخواد راجع به زمان حرف بزنه یکی از کاراکترها رو میبره پای یه پله و بهش در مورد اینکه زمان چطوری کار میکنه یه تصویری رو نشون میده. اون پلکانی که توی اون فیلم میبینین الهام گرفته از یکی از نقاشی‌های موریس اشره و من توی فیلم کوتاهی که توی دانشگاه سالها قبل ساخته بودم سعی کردم که یه بازنمایی از نقاشی اشر توی اون فیلم توی یه لانگ تیک داشته باشم. پس این در مورد این رابطه‌ای که میگین میتونم بفهمم این رابطه رو.
Yes, I think I know what you mean in the sense that if we think of, for instance, the film Inception by Christopher Nolan, there's a reflection about time there where he brings this character up a ladder and there's this talks about the past, and that shot is inspired by the paintings of M.C. Escher, who is a painter who also inspired me very much in the way. And in fact, what I tried to do was to see if I could take Escher's poetics, aesthetics, language into the language of the long take.
Is this also something to do with Iranian traditions, cinema and narrative? Is there a focus also on the relationship between the present and the past?
این توی این یه سنت قدیمی در سینمای ایران نیست. یعنی سینمای ایران ترجیح داده همیشه در مورد داستانهایی که فرم‌های پنهان‌تری دارن صحبت بکنه. یعنی بیشتر راجع به روابط آدم هاست و راجع به روابط بین کاراکتر هاست و شاید از این نظر فیلمایی که من کار میکنم یه کار تازه‌ای باشه توی سینمای ایران.
I don't think this is so present in the history of Iranian cinema. It's much newer there because Iranian cinema has focused more on what is hidden from sight and what is, secret. So relationships between people and such. And so I think probably the films I make are quite new within the landscape of Iranian cinema.
مثلا در مورد سینمای عباسی کیارستمی ما همیشه المان‌های ثابتی رو میشناسیم که سینمای کیارستمی رو به خاطر اونا به جا میاریم، اما برای من سینمای کیارستمی اون بعد متافیلمش بوده که مورد توجهم بوده. یعنی کیارستمی فیلم‌هاش یه جور بازی در بازیه، یه جور فیلم در فیلمه و اون بخشش بوده که منو جذب کرده.
And you know, when we think of the cinema of Abbas Kiarostami in Iran, we tend to refer to let's say, a number of recurring elements, which are the reason why we know him and we pay so much attention to him. But for me, what really intrigues me about the cinema of Abbas Kiarostami is the metafilm dimension that many of his films have, in the sense that they are like a game inside a game, a play inside playing, acting within acting, a film within a film.
فیلم آخر خیلی کار پیچیده‌ای بود برام، به خاطر اینکه باید بازیگرا رو از تاجیکستان انتخاب می‌کردم. تیم کارگردانی قبل از من به اونجا رفت و ویدیوهایی از اونجا برای من میفرستاد و این کار رو اینطوری از راه دور انجام دادم تا وقتی که به اونجا رفتم و بازیگرا رو اوکی کردم. اما توی فیلم‌های قبل‌ترم دنبال بازیگرای تئاتر می‌گردم، چون که اونا توی اجرا کردن پرفورمنس‌های طولانی بهتر هستن و فیلم‌های من پر از لانگ تیک‌های طولانیه.
So my latest film, Black Rabbit, White Rabbit, is a bit different in the sense that it had a very long and complex casting process because we needed to select lots of Tajik actors, and so I sent my film crew in advance, especially my ADs, to do a pre-casting in Tajikistan, and they'd send me videos, and then finally when I got there I did a sort of final selection. But for my previous films, I've always selected and looked for theatre actors because I find that they are better at working on long takes, and my films are full of long takes, so they just perform better.
Right, and is it difficult to raise money in Iran for films these days, or is there a political element where you've got to be careful what you say?
ببینید توی سینمای ایران ما به نظر من سه دسته فیلمساز داریم اگه اینطوری بخوام حساب کنم. بعضی از اونها به دولت خیلی نزدیکن، برای اونها پیدا کردن پول خیلی ساده است. بعضی از اونها با تهیه کننده‌های خصوصی کار میکنن که مثل همه جای دنیا با فیلم‌های کمدی بیشتر کار میکنن به خاطر اینکه توی گیشه فروش داشته باشن. و یه دسته سوم که ما اسمشون رو توی ایران گذاشتیم فیلمسازان مستقل، اونا همیشه پیدا کردن پول براشون سخته، به خصوص اینکه حاضر نیستن به دولت نزدیک باشن چون نمیخوان زیر سانسور دولت تا اونجایی که ممکنه کار بکنن و این کار رو براشون خیلی خیلی سخت میکنه. بله، شاید یکی از دلایلی که من فیلمم رو با سرمایه گذار بیرون از ایران ساختم این بود که پیدا کردن پول برای این فیلم‌ها تو ایران دیگه سخت شده.
So I think it might be helpful to think of filmmakers in Iran in three categories. So the first category are filmmakers who are very close to the regime and for whom, therefore, raising funds is easy. Then there's a second group of filmmakers who work with private producers and tend to make comedies and so have sort of big box office successes. And then there's a third group. In Iran we call them the independent filmmakers who do not want to be affiliated with the government, also because they don't want to the extent that they can work within the censorship system. And so, of course, raising funds for them is always difficult, and perhaps it's become more difficult than it was before, and perhaps that's why this time around I've worked with foreign investors.
Just one more. در حال حاضر فکر می‌کنم بزرگترین چالنجی که بین این دسته سوم فیلمسازان مستقل در ایران وجود داره اینه که آیا اونا باید فیلم خوب بسازن اما مثلا قوانین دولتی رو رعایت بکنن، یا باید برن توی سینمای آندرگراند و سعی کنن اونجا فیلم بسازن هرچند فیلمشون کامل نباشه اما اصلا به قوانین دولتی گوش ندن. فکر میکنم این بزرگترین چالشی که این گروه سوم دارن که اونا رو تبدیل کرده خودش به دو تا دسته جدا از هم.
And then I think there's another major challenge that faces the independent filmmakers, and it's whether to decide to work within the boundaries of censorship and push them as much as you can, but then that allows you to actually film without. I'll just add this contextual note, Shahram Jan, if I'm adding anything too much, please tell me. But basically means that you can shoot on location and also that then your cinema can be shown in Iranian cinemas. And so have a direct relationship with the audience, with the Iranian audience. Or instead make a film underground, which also means you're always shooting with great anxiety and in a hurry, and you're never sure if you can actually complete the shoot or shoot the film you wanted to. And where we are at the moment, the problem is that the independent filmmakers have split into these two factions.
I think there was a film that was made recently about sort of political situation with females that was made without much permission, apparently, in Iran. It's quite a well-known film, I think, recently.
فکر میکنم که بعد از جنبش زن زندگی آزادی تو سینما ایران یه زلزله به وجود اومد و مخاطب دیگه نمیتونست اون تصویر سینماتیکی که قبلا ما از زنان توی فیلم مثل قرارداد که حجاب رو داشتن اما در زندگی واقعی میتونستن اونجوری نباشن، تماشاگر دیگه اینو از ما نمیخواست و همین باعث شد که بخش بزرگی از فیلم‌های زیرزمینی که تو ایران ساخته میشه حتی لزوما فیلم سیاسی نباشن، اما چون فقط میخوان یه تصویر واقعی نشون بدن اونا تبدیل شدن به فیلم‌های زیرزمینی. فیلم My Favorite Cake، کیک محبوب من از بهتاج سنایی و مریم مقدم، فکر کنم یکی از این دسته فیلم‌ها بود.
So I think what's happened is that after Women Life Freedom, there's been an earthquake inside Iranian cinema, and this has to do with the fact that the audience no longer wants to accept the previous long-standing cinematic convention whereby women were always shown wearing the mandatory headscarf in films, even when it did not correlate to the way women would sort of be dressed in real life. I think the audience no longer wants to see scenes that do not reflect real life, and then as a consequence, a lot of films are now made underground by filmmakers who maybe do not pursue political subjects, but just want to show reality as it is. And I think, for instance, My Favorite Cake by بهتاج سنایی ها and مریم مقدم is a good example of this sort of film.
Thank you for listening to a Fish Out of Water podcast. This is your host, Richard Lipman. Should you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please get in touch. This podcast is sponsored by Demode Records, available at www.richardlipman.co/Demode Records.